Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned for my weekly reading report. It's time for my weekly reading report, that thrill-packed program where I talk about all the stuff that I read during the past week. And every week, I complain about how I didn't have enough time the previous week to read everything that I wanted to read. And this past week was even worse. So, I'll just keep complaining. The one part of my reading that really suffered this past week was my comic book reading. Didn't get to read the comic books that I wanted to read, which I know is really a tragedy to my viewers because my comic book videos are so popular. I didn't even finish that Star Trek comic I was reading, Roger, which is awful. So that's an awful thing. So I will just talk about the stuff that I did read, and I did read some stuff. So let's talk about that. I have here my list for the 500 book challenge, the never-ending challenge, where I have to read 500 books that I own before I'll buy any new ones. And the first book we're going to be talking about on this list here is number 244. And number 244 was a Western, actually. It was this one. It's Louis L'Amour's The Ferguson Rifle, which I picked up. I like to read Westerns, and I'm trying to get more Westerns into my regular reading, aside from just June on the Range, which is coming up real soon, which is a reading event devoted to Westerns. But I did read this one. This is Louis L'Amour's The Ferguson Rifle, which was interesting. I don't think it's one of Louis L'Amour's best books, but it was an entertaining book. It's interesting in that it takes place earlier than most Westerns take place. Most Westerns take place usually after the Civil War, sometime in the latter 1860s up through the 1880s. Usually, Westerns are placed right around there. Not always, but usually. This one takes place much earlier. He doesn't give a date for this story, but it must have taken place, I think, around 1805, somewhere around 1805. I'm guessing. Somebody out there might know better, but I think that's around when this story took place. And it's really, really good. It's like I said, it's not his best, but it's really entertaining. About Ronan Chantry, who takes his prized Ferguson rifle to out west. His family has been killed in a fire. It was a very tragic event, and he had some trouble about it. He had to fight a duel because somebody accused him of setting the fire when it was really an accident. Anyway, there was all kinds of trouble, and he said, "Screw civilization, I'm going out west, and I'm just going to go out there and die." So he does that. He leaves. He's understandably depressed, Ronan Chantry. Now, he's a really smart guy. He's a professor, and he goes out west, but he's not just, a brainy guy. He's also a tough guy because he's a Louis L'Amour hero. And he runs into some trappers and hunters out west, and he joins their little group. And they run into a woman in peril. She's in peril. And the story turns into a story about treasure, lost treasure. And it includes a dastardly villain and his gang. There's actually a lot of stuff in this book. It's highly entertaining. Ronan Chantry is a good character. The villain in this is really good. A lot of the other characters are paper thin. Ronan Chantry and the villain are really the only two people who come off as real human beings. Everybody else is just a paper thin character for the most part, but it's still pretty great. Louis L'Amour, The Ferguson Rifle, like I said, not his best, but definitely worth a read. It's definitely entertaining. It's a short little thing, and if you actually have time to read, you can read it in a couple hours, probably. So this was awesome. Louis L'Amour, The Ferguson Rifle. He's Louis L'Amour usually delivers. He pretty much always delivers, at least an entertaining story, and he did this time. So that was that. Then I wanted to get back to Horror Mayhem, which is a reading event going on this month, created by the Bookish Bryants, dedicated to reading short horror fiction. Shorter horror fiction, novels under 250 pages, or short stories, novellas, that kind of thing. And that's going on all of May, and it's one of my favorite reading events. So I had to decide what I was going to read for Horror Mayhem next. And so I chose this one for book 245 on the list. And that was this. This is More Macabre, edited by Donald A. Wollheim. This is one I definitely wanted to get to this year because last year I read The Macabre Reader from Donald A. Wollheim. This is the sequel to that. There were only 2 of these, I believe, these Macabre books. They came out, what was it? This one came out, what, in 1961? Maybe? Yeah, this one came out in 61. And this was awesome. This was almost as good as the first one. The only thing that prevented it from being that good is that there was one story in here that I just didn't like. Most of the stories in here are pretty great and really kind of grisly, ghastly, hard-hitting horror stories for the most part. This is good stuff. More Macabre. And the theme of Horror Mayhem this year is decades of dread, where you try to get to different decades. And this has a few in here. So let's take a look at the contents of More Macabre, and I'll talk about the stories and what I thought about them. The first one was Mother by Protest by Richard Matheson. So it's starting right off with the Richard Matheson story from 1953. That was an excellent story. About a very unique alien invasion, at least at the time. It was similar to, what was it, the Midwich Cuckoos, as far as the idea was concerned, but it definitely has its own take on it, and it was really good. Very much of its time, as far as there's a married couple, and as far as how the wife was treated in the story, very much a 1950s story, you can tell. But Richard Matheson, he usually delivers, and he wrote a pretty creepy story in this one. So Mother by Protest, that was pretty good. Again, not one of his best stories, but it was a pretty good story. Then we had another H. Warner Munn story. This is the second H. Warner Munn story that I've read for Horror Mayhem. The last one was The Well, and this one is The Wheel. And so as soon as I saw that, I thought, well, can this be as grisly and horrible as The Well was? And it was just that grisly and horrible. The Wheel is excellent, an excellent H. Warner Munn story. So it's the second winner in a row from H. Warner Munn for Horror Mayhem, and I probably should have been paying more attention to this author. I have a couple of his books. I've got The Werewolf of Ponkert. I've got another one that was one of his fantasy novels, but I think that might be all I have from H. Warner Munn. I don't think he published a lot, but this story was excellent. So yeah, definitely an author I should have been paying more attention to this whole time. Then we have the very famous story, The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. That one, I believe, was first published in 1899, I think. I could be wrong, but that was a really good story. I like that one. Most of the other stories, I think, were published in the 1920s, maybe up through 1930. So then we have The Cookie Lady by Philip K. Dick. So that one had to be published later. That was published in 1953. That was good. That was really good. Then we have The Spider by Hans Heinz Ewers, which is fantastic. That's a great story. Then we have The Curse Kiss by Theodore Roscoe. And that's the only story I thought was just not particularly great. The Curse Kiss by Theodore Roscoe. It's not terrible. I just thought it was just like, wasn't all that. But that's the only story in here I didn't really like. Then we have a very pulpy story. We have a story called Fungus Isle by Philip M. Fisher. And I don't know much about that author, Philip M. Fisher, except that he probably read a lot of William Hope Hodgson, because Fungus Isle reminds me very much of a William Hope Hodgson type of story, where they go to an isle we have shipwrecked sailors on an island that is full of giant, monstrous, horrifying fungus. And it's pretty great, It's a very pulpy horror story. Like I said, it feels very much like a William Hope Hodgson idea. And it was very entertaining. I like that one a lot. And then we have the grisly and horrifying The Copper Bowl by George Fielding Eliot. The Copper Bowl by George Fielding Eliot. And it was just grisly and awful and horrifying. Felt very much almost like an EC Comics horror story, except that the victims in this story were innocent, which always makes the story more grisly and horrifying. So this is good stuff. More macabre from Donald A. Wollheim. If you ever find an old copy of The Macabre Reader or More Macabre, definitely worth picking up. These old horror anthologies are fun. And so I read that. That was 245. The book I just picked up yesterday is this one. This is Pirates of the Pacific, a Doc Savage adventure. So I'm reading Doc Savage every month, and I'm reading a Doc Savage adventure every month, and I'm reading them in the order that they were originally published, as opposed to the order that they were published in this line of pocketbooks, or Bantam. Who does these? It's Bantam. Bantam books. In this line of Bantam books. It's very early, Roger. I don't think it's even 5 o'clock yet. It's 4:45, and I haven't had my coffee, so I'm barely functioning. This book so far is good. I just started it. This book, when it was published in Bantam, was book number 19, when it was actually book number 5. Bantam published them all out of order for some reason. And I'm really glad I'm reading them in the published order, the order that they were originally published in the pulp magazines. Because when this story starts, Doc Savage and his companions are still in the submarine that they were in the last adventure. So this adventure is a different adventure, but it continues on directly from what happened last month in the Doc Savage pulp magazine. And they're in the same submarine. It refers to that story. So if you were reading this in the order that they came out in the paperbacks, you'd be like, what the hell? That story happened several paperbacks ago. When really it's just the next month that this adventure takes place. So I'm glad I'm reading them in publication order, because already in the first 5 adventures, stuff like that has popped up. So yeah, Pirates of the Pacific, I don't have much to say about it yet. Has a really cool cover on this Bantam paperback. The covers on these were usually pretty fantastic. And I'm really enjoying these. This is not very long. None of these Doc Savage adventures are. What is this? 136 pages? It's 136 pages. So I'm going to read this. What I read after this, I don't know. I have no idea. Now, I did say that my comic book reading suffered this week. The only thing I did read as far as comic books go are some issues from the Fantastic Four. I am reading every issue of the Fantastic Four from their first run of the Fantastic Four. And I am at John Byrne's celebrated run on the Fantastic Four. And what's going on right now, so the Fantastic Four just got back from Battle World, where they were off having the Secret Wars, the Secret Wars event that happened in, what was it, 83, 84, somewhere around there. And they were whisked away, the Fantastic Four was, to Battleworld, all except the Invisible Woman, because she was pregnant and didn't, join the boys off on their adventure. So they went off and they were teleported to Battleworld, and they've been gone a week. And then they arrived back. But when they arrived, there's been a change. The Thing is missing. The Thing decided he was going to stay on Battleworld, because on Battleworld, he can change back and forth to Ben Grimm. So he stays on Battleworld to have some further adventures. So She-Hulk, which was a favorite of John Byrne's, She-Hulk joins the Fantastic Four. And she was on the Fantastic Four for a little while. And this is when she first joins. But she doesn't have a chance to do much yet when they first get back, because Sue Storm Richards, who's been pregnant, has an issue with her pregnancy, as she did during her first pregnancy. And so they need to, and she's having trouble because there's, the child is in peril due to radiation poisoning. And none of the radiation experts that they have can help her. And so everybody is recommending that Reed Richards find Dr. Octopus. That sounds like a great idea. Reed Richards needs Dr. Octopus to help. And so we have an adventure where Reed Richards has to go and find Dr. Octopus, which goes about as well as you would expect. Dr. Octopus, who is insane. So, maybe not the person you really want to get to help your wife. An insane person, but, it's a comic book. So he does. And he actually talks Dr. Octopus into helping him, only to get back too late. And I remember these are some of the issues that I was reading at the time when I was a teenager, and I was absolutely shocked by the ending. I'm going to give it away. The ending of this story is that Sue has a miscarriage, which is the kind of thing that never happened in comic books, a real life tragic event. And it was completely shocking. And I remember I was kind of floored by that when it happened. But that's it was the 1980s. So they were moving into even more realism, and that was a real event that was not badly handled. The 80s were an interesting time for comic books. And the Fantastic Four, it just continues to be great. I think the Thing needs to be on the team, personally. But he wasn't for a while. She-Hulk was on it. So I'm going to continue to read this. And I think that's everything. I did get some stuff in the mail, but I'll talk about that tomorrow on my, or actually on Roger's Random Book Show. I got one or two things in the mail. One or two things. Anyway, I'll talk about that tomorrow. I desperately need some coffee because I'm like, okay, guys, we'll catch you next time.